Mm. Yeah, so just good, I think, to have the logo and
Probably. That way I
new
can just
shape.
be behind it as move my head.
Well, yeah, I mean, I could probably just grab the PowerPoint and create one, because I think you can create them in this pictures one. So it'll be different to having wheat fields behind me as an example.
Mm-hmm.
See if I've got
a few there now.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Okay. All right. Everybody ready?
Yes. I'll keep adding people as they come, right, Ollie?
All right. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to today's Closure Planning Practitioner Association presentation. Please, we'll get started in a few minutes, but if you can please keep your microphones and cameras off while we let everybody into the lobby, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the Closure Planning Practitioners Association presentation today. If I can ask everybody to please keep their cameras off while we just let everybody into and get set up. Thanks very much. We'll be Good afternoon and thanks everybody for joining. Welcome to today's Closure Planning Practitioners Association presentation. We're just getting set up and letting people into the lobby. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. If I could just ask everyone to keep their cameras and microphones off, and we'll be with you shortly. Okay, I think we might get started. We've got quite a few people in the call now. So thanks very much for joining today's Closure Planning Practitioners Association presentation, Mine Closure Execution, Closure Lessons Learnt in the Coal Mines of South Africa. My name's Kylie McKay and I'm the chair of the technical subcommittee, and I'll be your host. And we have Phil Lombard from Worley today presenting. So we'll get started, I think, into today's presentation. So firstly, just an acknowledgement of the traditional custodians. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Closure Planning Practitioners Association acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. And we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Today's webinar is currently being recorded. Just to let everybody know that this webinar recording will be available on the CPPA website over the coming week, and you'll be able to access it there if you're a member. If you're not, or if you're an associate member. If you're not a member, we'd encourage you to become a member or contact us if you're unable to access the recording. Just a little bit of webinar etiquette. If we can keep our cameras and microphones turned off unless you're answering or asking a question, and pop your hands up if you've got a question. If you can also, as we work through the presentation, pop your questions into the chat. It just allows us to work through those questions towards the end once Phil's finished presenting today. And it also enables us to keep a bit of a transcription of those questions if we need to answer them outside the call. The Closure Planning Practitioner Association vision is to promote global leading practice skills in closure within Australia by representing and engaging with closure planning practitioners to develop and build professional capacity. And this webinar is one such activity that CPPA promotes as part of realising this vision. We're always looking for good examples of closure planning, including all kinds of rehab. If you've got a story to share, or such as the presentation today, we would really encourage you to submit a short description of that to our website or contact CPPA in general to be able to present on one of these webinars. Your shares are always well received and really appreciated. We'd also like to do a little bit of a shout out to our sponsors, SRK Consulting, Green Road, O'Kane, Ingeni, Dendra, SGM Environmental and Venetia. Without these sponsors, we couldn't bring you the presentations that we do deliver each month as part of your CPPA membership, or run networking events and other really great programs that CPPA provides to its members. Thank you very much. If you're interested in finding out what events we have coming up for CPPA, you can go onto our website and look at the events, and you can just use the QR code there if you're of a mind. If you become an ordinary member or register for free as a corresponding member at the below web address or use the QR code, you'll actually receive upcoming, and I'm sure that most people on this call have already received, is how they actually joined this or registered for this particular event today. You'll receive ongoing emails letting you know of upcoming events. Another way to keep in contact with and up to date on what's going on with CPPA is to download the mobile app. I personally find it's really excellent for keeping me abreast of the events coming up for CPPA and also how to register really easily. You can access this via Google Play, via the QR code there, or the Apple Store. And it basically allows me to register and plan myself around my other commitments. So I'd really encourage everybody to download the app. So that takes us to today's presentation. So as I mentioned before, it's mine closure execution, closure lessons learned in the coal mines of South Africa. And today we have Phil Lombard, who is the ANZ Principal Consultant Closure for Worley Australia. Thank you so much for joining us today, Phil. Philip has been involved in the operational management of 16 closed mine sites, open cast and underground, as General Manager in South Africa with Billiton, BHP Billiton and South 32. His experience also spans mine closure consulting in Australia, such as the first rehabilitation plan and cost estimation for onshore and offshore infrastructure of Dalrymple Bay Coal Terminal, probably didn't say that correctly, Mackay, Queensland, to mine closure planning in West Africa and closure maturity support in Indonesia and New Caledonian mines. A very vast and broad set of experience and skills. Phil has more than 25 years experience in various aspects of mining and engineering management with specialist skills in closure activities. This experience features mine site rehabilitation activities, demolition of structures, water management, community and stakeholder engagement, all while adhering to the engineering, health, safety, environment and community guidelines. Today, Philip will take us through his experiences in Africa, setting the context for closure execution cycle in various types of coal mines, from the planning phases through the closure project delivery, and most importantly, the lessons learned along this journey. Thanks so much for joining us today, Phil. I'm going to hand over to you now. If you can share your screen, that'd be fantastic.
Kylie, thank you. Thank you for the lovely introduction as well. Can you hear me clearly?
Absolutely, we can. Yes, and please feel free to ad lib on that as well and give us some more detail around your vast experience.
Oh no, look, you've painted a beautiful picture. I'm going to struggle to live up to all of that. Just getting the PowerPoint to share. There we go. Can you see it?
And we can see it perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you very
All right.
much.
Well, no problems. I'll hand over now, and yeah, looking forward to it.
Thanks, Kylie. Thank you all for joining. It's lovely to be here and have this opportunity to rather do a talk than a presentation. So in light of that, I'll just kick off with a quick agenda. We've done the introductions. I'll do a short acknowledgement because I am in paradise down here in Tasmania, so it's important we highlight that. And then, yeah, brief history, looking at the mining, the closure legacy issues, stakeholders, and additional challenges. Now, acknowledgement, I would like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. Also like to pay respect to the elders, both past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present. As most of you might or would know, is the people down here, the Lutruwita people. And Tasmania is a very special place. And for those who still think of coming down here, I would really encourage you to do that. In terms of the brief history, I think just to give some context, some of you would have been to South Africa, some of you have read about it, some of you have met people that have come from there. I'm sure we've got many South Africans at this point in time all over Australia and other parts of the world. But yes, to give some context, is that the focus area that we'll be looking at is the geological area of the Eka Group, what they call the Vryheid Formation, which is to the eastern parts of Johannesburg. And you'll see I've got a lot of images brought into the presentation because I would rather speak to that and then, ask you to pop questions and thoughts in the chat that we can also address while we on certain images. Right, the first one is just a brief history of coal mining in South Africa, and I apologize for these first two slides that I just want to highlight some dot points there for us. That is the oldest mining enterprise in the country, and since 1923 it has steered the economy and society to prosperity. Obviously, electricity and electricity generation became a very flow-on effect from that in all the sectors of the economy and society. The coal mining began commercially in the mid-19th century, primarily driven by the discovery of diamonds at Kimberley, which is in the Northern Cape of South Africa, and well-known Kimberley diamonds and the crown jewels and all of that. And the discovery of gold then in the Witwatersrand, which is the Johannesburg area, further fueled coal mining expansion, with major coalfields developed in areas like Mpumalanga, which is the one that we'll focus on, formerly known as the Eastern Transvaal, and KwaZulu-Natal, leading to significant growth in production throughout the 20th century, particularly with the establishment of Eskom, which is the state-owned energy generation company, power utility, as they say, which heavily relies on coal for electricity generation. Early coal mining was obviously small scale and involved extraction or extracting coal from the surface or shallow underground mining endeavors, which also was extracted with outcrops and exposed seams. More than often it would be a hillside that they would see the exposed coal and simply just start mining into that hillside right through it out the other end. Apologies, I have to go back. I snuck in that little snippet there below the image of the Witbank mine where Winston Churchill was hidden from the Boer patrols, but I'll get back to that later. It's just a bit of an appetizer. The underground mining there's someone on the call here that might want to convince you that I'm the guy down there with a shovel loading there, but it's not true. It's not me. Early shaft mines were widened wells that were sunk into hillsides. Obviously, the adits, as we refer to them, and near horizontal tunnels, as I've mentioned, were driven into the hillsides for drainage as well. The room and pillar method was used to extract coal while leaving pillars to support the roof, and we'll talk a bit more about that, and I've got some images on that I'll share with you. Those were challenges of early mining. As mines went deeper, water became more difficult to manage. Crude methods were used to pump water out of the mines, including bucket and chain devices, windmills, and belts with circular plates. Explosions were caused by naked flame lamps igniting gas in the shafts. There were the safety improvements of Humphrey Davis and George Stephenson inventing the safety lamp, which enclosed the flame in the mesh to prevent the spreading of gas. And it also detected, as you would all know, noxious levels of carbon dioxide, so it replaced the canaries in the cages that they had. Let's move on to the closure process. So my journey started in the early 1990s in an underground coal mine with a small open pit section as well that had a truck and shovel operation going, as I said, in the Eastern Transvaal in those days. And, you know, I get so excited in a sense when I look at all these new initiatives, and I've just given an example here of how things are being portrayed in this whole closure process. But it challenged me when I looked at all of that to say, what would be the essence of today's discussion? And what is it that I want to share with you as a one unique lesson learned? Because there's so many other things, and as we go through it, you'll see that, you know, you can get very excited about all the technical aspects and, you know, all these, as I say, beautiful graphics that we have nowadays just really get things up there, and we all get very excited about it. I mean, just the prospect of digital mining and digital closure for that matter, developing a digital twin for closure in the future. All of that stuff is amazing, but I realized that our time would be limited to explore all of that in a short space of time like now. And therefore, you know, I thought it's important that we try and capture some of the thoughts, but ultimately that there would be what I would say, in my personal experience, being a most valuable lesson. So I'll try and focus on that. But there's definitely a journey along this way that we can talk about. And we can start with, you know, closure legacies. Obviously, risk is always front of mind. You know, you have old, shallow underground mines. Some of those mines were only about 18 meters below surface. And you'll see on the next slide, you know, some images of that. The approach was obviously always to do a risk assessment, looking at safety factors on those pillars of those board and pillar mines, and then moving into action planning, which was essential for approaching these challenges and dealing with them, and then obviously progress updates, because in all of these there were multiple shareholders. Now, in the context of South Africa, you would have started with obviously communities first, then the wider regional area, and there you would have had your mayors of the towns and all the towns involved. So to give another bit of context, we had 11 operating mines and then the 16 closed mines. And in a lot of cases, there were already opportunities for us to start with concurrent rehab on some of the operational mines. So you would have subdivisions within that, which brought in a new stakeholder aspect of the operating entity of the business versus the closure side of it, where we would work together, but starting with concurrent rehabilitation and dealing with some of those aspects related to that. And for that, you had to have regular updates and progress updates. And then it would go further beyond the stakeholders in terms of mayors of towns and to the Department of Mines in South African context, where you would have a very close relationship with them and giving them regular updates. They obviously very involved in what's happening and how it plays out in terms of closure. Then the next slides that I'll be sharing with you are mostly, well, all of them are from my camera basically, with some aerial images that were even before the days of mobile cameras and phones, and even before drones, where we had to still use fixed wing aircraft to do flyovers and get some good images of the work we're doing and the updates. On the next one, the first one, again, I referred to Winston Churchill's hideout. It just gives you a bit of a feel what's happening over time, especially with those shallow mines that I've mentioned. The specific mine is also about 18 to 20 meters below surface, and you can see the board collapse, in other words, between the pillars. It's an ongoing thing in that whole region, especially, as I say, the shallow areas, and the rock engineers in our midst would tell us that, you know, when you start only going beyond 40 meters depth, you would start the changeover from sinkholes to subsidences, which we'll also look at. But shallower than that, we have to deal with sinkholes. And you can see in the next image there, a sinkhole in a main road between two towns. And that becomes very challenging in how you manage that, and the stakeholders involved in all of that, the roads department, obviously local town councils and those people, and obviously looking at more signs of further collapses happening, because usually on the first image you can see it's not just a single sinkhole in isolation. They usually have got a whole array of them in a line. The last image on that one is the shallow mining, where you start getting spontaneous combustion. And then obviously with barometric pressure changes, you will have flames coming out to surface like that, which makes it very challenging, especially like in this specific instance of this image. There's a very large formal community, mostly industrial, within a few hundred meters from this area. But on the other side of this, the main road next to this fire, or this specific area where there's a large underground fire, there's a massive informal community, mostly because of South Africa's migrant workforce that's been through the ages since the start of mining, as you would have seen in some of those earlier photos as well. Lots of migrant workers, and obviously housing cannot keep up, so you have a lot of informal housing, and that becomes the challenge then in terms of, you know, you have these high risk areas. Fencing is not really an option, because the fences get taken down the very next day or the same day that you try and erect them, because they use that same material for their housing structures and so on. This specific area, we've measured temperatures of 1,200 degrees Celsius with thermocouples and asbestos gloves that they use in the steel factories. It's unbelievable how quickly that steel cable becomes very, very hot when you try and lower the thermocouple down the hole. Speaking of the artisanal mining and the communities, that's the next challenge. You know, a sinkhole would open up like this one in this image, and people are unbelievable in terms of the risks they take. They would just go down these tunnels, very old mine tunnels, and start bringing coal out, obviously for their own domestic needs, but also to sell, to generate some income. And it's a huge challenge for the closure teams then to come and close these sinkholes, because first of all you have to try and ensure that all the people have vacated that mine before you close it. And language is often a challenge. You know, we have Portuguese-speaking people. We have people that, well, that's about 7 or 8 different languages just in that local area. So it can become a huge challenge, and obviously they're fearful of persecution as well, which is never the case, but it is a very challenging situation. Then as we get to the deeper areas, as I say, beyond the 40 meters deep, then you start getting subsidences like this one. There's a Google Earth view, not from my camera lens, but just to show the progression of how, you know, the initial failure would take place in the center there. The pillars around the edges then would be under stress and then start collapsing further and further. And this specific image in the middle is that one that you can see in the farmer's field on the right-hand bottom corner of that image. So that introduces another share of stakeholders, and obviously the farmers in the area. Many of them would have bought these farms not knowing that it's undermined because of the age of some of these mines, the late 1800s, early 1900s. And it is a challenge then to convince them that we need to work together in terms of how we manage that. The next step in terms of understanding the extent and the challenge of identifying your stakeholders is looking at how you can clearly define boundaries, and specifically your neighboring mines. In many instances here, you would have had like at least 2 to 3 companies mining in the same area over time. And in this specific image that I'm showing you here, the maps that you can see are the old ones. We've got 1930s about, which was part of our company's record keeping. And then we could overlay it with a neighbor in terms of their records that they had, and that's where the digitization came in. So we could start looking, we would have mined the number 2 seam, for instance, here, and they would have mined 4 seam over that area. So the 4 seam would then overlap our 2 seam here, which creates another set of challenges over time. But so ultimately, to start digitizing all of that, bringing it in to better understand your responsibilities and how you manage it going forward. And look, the old miners were very well known for their pillar robbing, so they would pull out of a section and then as they move along, they would, what we call L and U-shape robbing, they would take the outer edges of the pillars away. It's easy coal as they pull out, and then obviously almost ensuring the early failure of the roof in that area, and the board sections becoming too large to sustain the weight above. And ultimately then that would end up in the extreme event as I've shown you in that image, where there's spontaneous combustion if the conditions are right, and then it becomes a huge challenge how to manage that going forward. Just for interest's sake, the white line you see here is a national road from the center of South Africa to Mozambique. And this is a town, so you can see very large parts of the Stel Valley. In fact, it's now got city status, and a huge part of that is undermined. And it's a long story, as I say. I can talk about each of these images for a good hour, but the challenge is now you have to do thermal scanning, which initially we had to do with fixed wing planes, and we had drums on a certain line that you would fly. You would have a drum here with sand, filled with sand, and then you pour diesel in it, and in the other end to create that line for the pilot at night to fly over. Fortunately, we've progressed to drones now, where we can get far better and more accurate readings and quicker, safer to do this, and ultimately move into thermal scanning to start identifying the hotspots, and then start having plans put in place how you're going to deal with that. And there's a whole host of them, from jet engines that will put into the other end of the mine and extract the air and seal off, and all these amazing things that the guys are coming up with nowadays. But all of them very, very challenging, because you're in the midst of a community, a very large formal community as well as informal. So once again, stakeholder relationship becomes key as you go forward. And then in this instance, you've got sections, let's call it the southern end of this mine, that's completely filled with water, and it's decanting, so you have to treat that water. And for that, there was a collaboration between my company at that point in time and another partner who had water coming in from their end, and we had to build a massive reverse osmosis water treatment plant that government then wanted you to supply that clean water to the town. And this is going to happen forever and ever into perpetuity, because that mine is huge. This area here in the center image is about 1,600 hectares of mining that'll continually fill up with rain and other events and whatever, leaking pipes and so on, and you're going to keep treating that water and giving it back to the community for as long as this continues to happen. So it makes it very, very interesting in terms of not just the fires and the burning mines, but also the water management and the other surface aspects relating to that. But that paints a very dark picture. Let's start moving to more positive aspects of it. So in the open cast sections, as I said, we've started collaborating with operating mines. And in this instance, this dragline was the last dragline in that section of a very large open cast mine that then was commandeered by the closure team to start closing the voids as it moved on through back to its exit point to go to another operation. And the closure teams could then come and follow behind with the normal closure activities of topsoiling and so on. But I'll get into some of that as well. The other aspect I quickly want to highlight that stood out for me over time is the effective topsoil management. And that middle image there is just to bring up this point to say, miners are notoriously known for not dealing well with their topsoil management, and it's a continuous, education topic that we have to keep punting with miners, is to do proper separation of the soils, and that ultimately, you can get that better soil, the biosome, and now you obviously store your topsoil, and you can get those back in your rehabilitation areas to get the best result. And you can see on the last image here on the right-hand side, good topsoil and good rehabilitation practice with seed mixes and so on for that specific region. We had a 6 seed mix there that we would plant in terms of getting the initial growth and root structures in the soil, and then for others to take over time. And obviously then getting into monitoring and maintenance of these areas, and that'll always pay dividends for many years to come. And that's about doing it right first time and of a high standard. Do not, skimp and take shortcuts. Further aspects of it would be your, the sequence of images showcasing the demolition of infrastructure on the left, large coal processing plant with a very large coal handling facility and coal dump, and cleaning that up, demolishing it, and then more importantly, the middle image having a capping design and the execution thereof, and sticking to the design and making sure you're doing everything to the best of your ability with what you've got. And then, as you can see there, to have good topsoil for this one, we unfortunately had to, I say unfortunately, but yes, we had to buy out land to create borrow areas that you then have to go back and also rehabilitate once you're finished. You can see it's a fixed wing plane here, old Cessna we used. And to take images over time and keep record of it and get some good coverage over that whole design and maintaining it like that. Monitoring and maintenance is key in this aspect. I don't see any questions yet, so I'm going to continue, but please feel free to pop questions in the chat and we can see how we go. Then I want to get to what I then deem as the most valuable lesson for me over these years there in the coal mines of South Africa was the stakeholder engagement can easily become a lip service and a failed promise legacy. And I've seen lots of that, not just in South Africa, but in the places in the world where I've now encountered closure planning, closure execution, and that's more than often the fingers being pointed at the mining industry is that we don't do this well. Now, in this case, the image on the left there was hydroponics that was set up. There was a number of those nurseries, if we can call them that was established throughout over time. And the aim was to have these initiatives turning into self-sustaining ventures, as you can see in the middle image, and some of them are still going to this day, as far as I'm aware, which is great because it creates opportunities for those communities to develop and grow and have the sustainability. But then the last image there that became one that was close to my heart was the education initiatives that was delivered and that, in my mind, delivered the best results over time, especially for those communities. As I said, there were 11 operating mines. and then the 16 closed mines. But all these operating mines had mine villages because of their rural positioning. They had mine villages associated with them that literally became small towns in their own right, shopping centers. Some of them even had a police station and obviously a post office, but there were always schools. So in all of them, there were primary schools, and then some of them had even high schools that serviced the larger community. And also we had bus services from the mines that would then bring children to the school. So not all the children were necessarily from the mine villages. That opportunity and the image that you see there was a later image of some newer computers being introduced, but the initial computers that we introduced at the schools were those old 368s and 468 models that did the rounds in the 1900s, late 1900s, the late 1990s. And it was amazing, once the teachers were all trained up and stuff, how this just took off and the kids were so involved in it, and it was fantastic to see this. And then we could, we created another further opportunity where we started with Saturday school classes for high school students, focusing on English, mathematics, science, and accounting. Those were areas that, were focus areas for the community as well as the Department of Education. And we had up to 1,000+ students per Saturday attending these classes. Now, why I'm excited about this is that this grew from an initial establishing computer centers at schools into an opportunity like this, where we could run this extra classes for many, many years and achieving fantastic results with the students at the end of year 12. But also all the companies involved during my time I changed companies 4 times with all the mergers and demergers and everything happening in that space. But the bursa programs that were established was amazing for the mine employees, the children of the mine employees. And ultimately, these bursas then had the opportunity to get into the graduate programs, which was very, very successful, linking to international graduate programs. And some of these students started their careers literally in the primary schools of some of these villages. And today, there's some of them that I'm still in contact with. That one is a CFO at a very large company, beautiful young lady. The others have become involved in mining. There's some of them that are mine managers. Some of them have actually migrated to Canada, to New Zealand, to America. There's even one that's currently ahead of one of the commodities in Kazakhstan for a multinational company there. And I think that sums up the whole thinking, and the lesson that I want to share is all these other things I've shown you, they will always be there. They will stay challenges. Some of them will stay legacies that are going to be very challenging to manage and to shake this whole negative image on mining. But I think that's part of the bit that I believe we should punt as the good side, and the things that bear results, like our stakeholder engagement where we do it well, communities where we do it well, and start promoting that more in our industry. I don't think mining per se is very good at showcasing the good things that are happening. It's quick to see on LinkedIn, oh, there's another tailings dam that's just failed here, and there's another one that's failed a week ago, and so on and so forth. So people, would like to rather go to that, but I do think there's an opportunity for us all to start focusing on the positive. And for me, one of the most important challenges, I think, especially in our Australian context, I've been in Australia now since 2017, and the one aspect that's close to my heart is the communities, and I think we can do a lot more to make that a better space for all of us, and to collaborate in a far more successful way in all of this. Then the last one, and that was just my tongue in cheek about Winston Churchill. I'm bringing it back. He's the lone soldier on the right there. As you can see there, he was a war correspondent for the Morning Post during the Anglo-Boer War. Captured by the Boer forces in 1899, but he escaped a month later. His escape became famous and he helped establish his reputation as a hero through all of that. Now, for days, he hid in the total darkness of a coal mine with a patter of rats scurrying around his pillow. His only company until Howard was able to smuggle his countrymen into a freight train that carried him to the freedom of Portuguese East Africa. Now, in a nutshell, what that's all about. He was captured and taken to Pretoria, which is just north of Johannesburg. So it's in the central part of what now is known as Gauteng, what was the Transvaal. But once he escaped, Churchill understood his stakeholders well enough to know he needed to head east because that's where the British coal mines were. So he had a journey of about 100 odd kilometers to get to the first coal mine. And that's the image there that I had right in the beginning as well. But he had to travel at night because the Boer commanders were looking for him. He was a high-profile prisoner that had escaped, so he could only travel at night following the railway line, staying hidden during the day, and eventually got to this mining village, which he didn't know exactly where it was, but he was aware it was there somewhere, and by pure chance he knocked on the first door, which was Mr. Howard, that was the general manager of that mine and still a British subject. So Howard then could take him in and then hid him in the mine underground for 2 weeks before they moved him again, and then ultimately they got him onto a train going down to what's now known as Mozambique and Maputo, formerly known as Lorenzo Marx, and he was hidden between bales of wool, and he found his way to Lorenzo Marx. Had given him some money to get on a ship there and get back to England. I had the privilege of meeting his granddaughter. She came out in 2008. She came and followed in his footsteps all along this journey of his to better understand what he had written about in his memoirs. And I think the lesson for us, even from the Churchill perspective, is that you have to understand your stakeholders, and it's a reciprocal relationship. And in Churchill's case, this is what saved his bacon, is that he was able to be able to get to people that he knew was there that could possibly help him. Right, I'll park it there for now for some questions. If there's any questions at this point in time. I see there's a first one.
That was a really interesting presentation and such a huge amount of information and experience in that as a whole. So yeah, I think we definitely could have had a much longer discussion about individual pieces, but that was a really great, I guess, overview of your experiences. We do have one question in the chat. Masad, are you wanting to ask your question if you're online? Okay, so he's
hello.
Yes, there he is.
Hi, Phil. Thanks for sharing. It's a great story that you shared with us. Very macro perspective, which is really good. So giving my question is also fairly macro as well, which is I was trying to work out, was there any mining rehab fund or that the state really owned that would be used in case mine would go bust or become insolvent? And the other part of the question is, what was the protocol of handling abandoned mines, and what were the costs that the state would use for closing them, or what were their responsibilities around that?
Masood, thank you for the question. I'll focus on the first part. Yes, there have always, well, I say always been, no, there have been, and there still is, mining rehabilitation funds that are set up by the companies, as it is in most other countries in the world, but specifically in the South African context. This money was then kept in a trust fund, but that was separate from the actual rehabilitation and concurrent rehabilitation that was happening. So the trust fund was there in the event of insolvencies or whatever, that money would revert to the state, who would then commit to do the rehabilitation required. We had a number of joint ventures because of the mining in those earlier days became joint ventures between large corporates, and then those joint ventures then established the funds accordingly. And ultimately, as I say, there would be a trust fund for the closed mines. As far as the abandoned mines, the state, well, by the time I left in 2017, there was still a lot of uncertainty in terms of what the state would do. And as far as I know, at this point in time, or well, up until then, there was very little done in terms of abandoned mines. And they were usually very small and perhaps not creating the challenges and risks of the larger mines at that point in time. So they basically overlooked up until now, and there's still a big issue and a challenge there.
Thanks for that, Phil. Just I've got a follow up on this one. Is that just a percentage according to the revenue earned, or how is the money being calculated to go into this trust fund? And then, of course, 1% does not really do a whole rehab work or closure of a site. Usually the mine planning principle says that 1% according to the ICMM guide, and of course it's been changed since then. The question is, how much was that put into the trust fund, and how much was actually getting used, and was it enough to actually close that mine or those mines?
Well, that's interesting in the sense that none of the mines that I was aware of really ever closed. There was one or two that were state-owned and part of the Eskom mix. They were Eskom mines, so the power utility. And there's been a bit of controversy about those closures in terms of closing your own mines and giving yourself a closure certificate. But as far as I know, up until today, I don't know of any other mines that have received a closure certificate per se. Coming back to your question of the percentage, there were obviously the initial closure designs during the process in terms of closure costing that was calculated based on certain calculations and calculators that were developed. And according to that, there was definitely no specific percentage. But I can take a stab here and put myself on the spot by saying I have yet to see a closure costing provisioning that is sufficient anywhere. There's usually often a zero missing or two zeros missing at the end because people don't fully understand. I don't think most people don't fully understand the extent of cost. Like I said, for instance, in this mine that I gave as an example to run that, I think it's currently running at 20 odd megaliters per day that it's water that it's cleaning and giving to the community, and it's being expanded again. But bottom line is you're going to run a water treatment plant like that, for instance, forever. So if you start calculating that cost, and that's just for one mine or one section of a mine, then it's massive, and I think that's the challenge for all of us, is to truly understand the cost of closure and how to calculate that and plan for that.
Yeah, that sort of leads in pretty well to a question that I've got, Phil. So looking at this, looking at stakeholder engagement in Australia and the landscape and how that's changed dramatically over the last few years, not only in around social impact assessment and planning, but also the way in which we stakeholder engage. And we're still learning in this space. And I'm sure you take so many learnings from this experience into how we engage with our stakeholders in Australia today. But I was just interested to see what sort of changes that you'd seen across the regulatory landscape in South Africa while you were there as a result of, doing these closures, having these long lead legacy issues, these community impacts, and then, that stakeholder engagement work. Did you see that stakeholder engagement work being done for these mines really feeding into how the regulators then regulated stakeholder engagement, if they do that at all? I'm not too familiar with the landscape in Africa in terms of regulatory and stakeholder engagement requirements, but it'd be really interesting to get a little bit of a summary from you around that.
Kylie, yes, thank you. That's a great question. And I think the best answer and the honest answer, always honest, is I don't think it's that great at this point in time. But I can honestly say during most of the late 1990s and early into the 2000s, there were very, very good relationships with the departments, Department of Environment, the Department of Mining, and our specific approach to all of this was during that time, we would have bi-monthly meetings with these departments in person. We would usually invite them out to different operations. Then we would share with them the updates in terms of progress of whichever aspect of that specific operation. And most importantly, we would take them to go and see this, because that's one thing we firmly, and I personally firmly believe in, is that you have to get people's boots dirty. You know, they can't sit and watch PowerPoint presentations all day. They can't just be on calls. Well, there were no Teams in those days, but you know, you need to get them to site so they can walk and understand and experience and speak to people and speak to the workers at the mine and speak to the community members, you know, and start engaging. Because the interesting thing was, you mentioned right at the beginning of my career, but before the days of Billiton, we were a company called Ingwe, which is a Zulu name for leopard. And, you know, just before I left in 2017, I was still in a community meeting where some of the elders referred back to promises made by Ingwe, you know, and the community don't often understand these mergers and then demergers and things like that. To them, that doesn't really matter, because ultimately there was someone representing the country that stood in front of the company that stood in front of them and made a promise or a commitment. And more than often, not all of that came to fruition. And that's what they often refer back to, you know, and they go for the deepest pockets as well. They're not totally ignorant, so they know. A good example, you know, when the demerger took place out of BHP Billiton into South 32, for many, many, many months, they would never even speak of South 32. They would just refer back to BHP, you know, BHP. So that is your challenge. And in that context, we had a lot of success by engaging with these regulators and bringing them on board and keeping them on board. You know, that was very important. The challenge later on, towards the end of my time there was a lot of change in government. So faction issues would cause, you know, a lot of change within local governments, for instance, in the councils and things like that. So you would just start building a relationship with someone, and then 6 months later they're gone, and you have to start over, you know. And I can tell you, I've stood many a time in a a mayor's office, or standing on my knees at the coffee table, rolling out plans and explaining to them the whole thing all over, why people cannot be allowed to build over this specific area because it's undermined and it's got the potential of burning, and so forth and so on. So yes, it became very challenging towards the end.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. And as a closure practitioner myself, I've found, you know, engaging with stakeholders, there is that element of constantly having to explain the bare bones of what you're trying to attempt, not only because you've got changing of guard, different people coming in and going, but the people also, you know, myself included, you know, I'll be talking to my partner and I'll remember what I think he said, which might actually not be what he said. So they call it, I was at the PRG yesterday, and one of the presenters was calling it the vomit principle, that you've literally got to, you know, present, you know, or I think another way of putting it, which is probably a little bit nicer, is the 7 times principle, where you've got to repeat something 7 times before you know that individual person has taken on board what you've said, because they've heard it 7 times. So they've heard each version that they might put to it those number of times, and then the 7th they might hear your version or the entire version. And then, you know, again, the vomit principle is really talking about saying, you know, if you have to say it one more time, you might actually vomit. But but effectively it's the same kind of principle where, you know, I find when we go out and do closure consultation that you're literally having to do this closure 101 just to get to the technical discussion. So and a good portion of that is, as you say, it's because you're not speaking to people all the time, you're not taking them out on ground all the time, and it's not regular enough to keep that knowledge in people's heads around what you want to talk about, given that they have a million other people trying to get their attention and talk to them about various things as well. So a huge challenge, and one, you know, I think we'll continue to work on probably while we're human beings, let alone closure practitioners. But does anybody else have any questions online? While everybody else is thinking about if they've got any questions, I've just popped Phil's details in the chat. If you'd like to, if you don't feel comfortable in this forum asking a question, or you'd like to pursue some discussion further in this space, or some of, you know, talk to Phil about some of the legacy issues or some of the management processes that he's employed over his vast career around closure planning, he has been really generous in saying that you can contact him directly. So his email is in the chat right now. And if anybody's got any other questions, please pop your hand up, and we will get them answered. Oh, we've got another one. Did you want to ask that again, Masad? Are you happy for us to read it out?
Thanks for that. Given the current times, every country, everywhere, every geopolitical regions are suffering. I guess the question I have is around, what's your thought on the closure practice of foreign companies in a different country? And what would be the case given this trade tariff going around the whole world? So if it's an American company working in South Africa, what would be the consequence of them on the, or how do you think this actually transpires in future, or even in Australia?
Masood, thank you. I've just said it's important to be honest, and I view you as a stakeholder in my world at this point in time, so I have to be honest with you, and I would rather not answer that because I've seen unfortunate situations where people do walk away in instances where they cannot sell off assets. They would simply walk away, and that's going to be, I think, an ongoing challenge in most parts of the world. But yeah, there are some amazing solutions out there, and I think as we can pursue more and more of them, there was one I posted today in our teams about the algae solutions, you know, in terms of algae growth and stuff, acid mine drainage, and there's so many other examples where amazing things can come, where you can start generating income out of closed mines and other aspects. I mean, we're all familiar with the Eden project and others. Not all of our mines lend themselves to an Eden project, but there must be more out there that we can do, and I think that's the focus. And that once again involves stakeholders like our communities, you know, get them more involved and help them understand the challenge at hand. You know, show them a brown coal mine that's going to take 12 years to fill with water, you know, why it's difficult, why it's challenging. Let them stand on the edge of the pit and see how big it really is.
And like you said as well, Phil, focusing on the positive, what opportunities there are, what we can do differently, and what we can do for future generations. I think that's a really great takeaway for everybody, and one pretty close to all of our closure planning hearts, I'm sure. On that note, we're pretty much out of time. So if you've got questions, please send them on to Phil. I'm sure that he will be really keen to engage with you and just have a chat even. You seem like the kind of guy that will be happy to have a chat, Phil. So you never know, you might even get an email from me. And thank you so much for your presentation. It was fantastic. And we really thank you for coming in all the way from Tasmania today.
Lovely opportunity. Thank you very much. Come visit us down here. Thanks, Kylie. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.